Hello, everyone. My name is Francois Ward. I'm a software engineering manager who specializes in the front end ecosystem and on software platform. And this is the third part of a series where we're looking at how much the front end changed in the last 5 years. We're looking specifically to see how much truth there is around the memes of how the front end world changes all the time or every couple of weeks. For those who are just joining us, there's a blog post, a link below, that I wrote 5 years ago about what I thought at the time was the state of the art. And we're doing a kind of a little retrospective on it. In this part, we're going to go over specifically utility libraries, testing, especially unit testing, as well as the world of build tooling. Now, obligatory warning, we're going to be covering a lot of technologies, and I can't be an expert or even up to date on everything. It's very likely I'm going to be getting some stuff wrong. So make sure to comment below if your experience differ, especially if it's different from mine. So utility libraries. And by that, I mean these libraries that contain a ton of utility functions to handle a lot of common programming tasks, especially but not limited to data manipulation. Back in the days and still today, you have things like lodash. At the time, underscore was still around, even though it was being phased out somewhat. And with React at the top of mind, functional programming was getting pretty big, and libraries like Remda that supported that really well were top of mind to some folks. Lodash also added a functional programming mode, which mostly meant that they allowed you to reverse order of some arguments and supported currying. Lodash was very much like the Swiss Army knife. If you could think of something, it probably had it. The biggest change since then is that the platform and browsers added a lot of these functions as built-ins. Think things like find, where, reduce, map. You can do all these things just using what's available directly in the browser. So the verdict in 2021 is that you really don't need it nearly as much as you used to. And it probably is a good idea to look at your usage of these libraries and to replace them wherever there are, again, like browser built in that can do that. You're going to save bytes, and in turn your application will load faster and just be a better user experience, even by just a little bit. And sometimes when there's no easy way to do what you want, well, because of tree shakings or by importing functions directly, you can reach out in something like lodash and pick just the function you want without pulling the entire library. Something that come to mind is deep cloning, which is still kind of hard to do on your own and to get it right by coding it yourself. So it makes sense to reach out for the version built in something like Lodash. If you're starting a new project though, just start with nothing. Leverage the platform as much as possible. And again, only reach out once you've hit a wall. Testing. The hardest part when discussing anything about testing is how fragmented the community is. You can speak about unit testing, about integration testing, about hand to hand testing, but people don't even agree about what these terms mean. So that means when you're trying to pick tools or have this discussion, folks are constantly speaking past each other. It makes it so hard. The blog post at the time focused on unit testing and component testing. So while there was a lot of progress in other areas of the testing world, I'm going to focus on that so that the video doesn't last an hour. So in 2016, it really felt like there was a new testing framework popping up every week. Honestly, it was pretty bad, and so I set out a couple of criterias to narrow it down. Testing for web application should work in a browser so that you could have real tests with a real environment. I felt they should be fast. That goes without saying. It should handle asynchronous tests really well. So, for things like data fetching, and not all tools supported that. It should also be easy to use at the command line for proper developer experience, and it should let me use whatever assertion or mocking library I wanted, since there was so much bike shedding in that world. Well, the first criteria running in browsers ruled out jest completely because that only works in Node.js, and people felt it was really important. There was a lot of pushback in the community to not being able to run your test in the real environment. Being able to use a standalone assertion and mocking library, I felt ruled out Jasmine because it came with its own and it made it somewhat redundant. And other frameworks like Tape were somewhat more exotic, like, or at least didn't have as much mind share, and I didn't feel this was an area where I wanted to reach out. So Mocha felt like a slam dunk. It checked all of those bucks and it was pretty good. It's still pretty good and it's still quite well maintained. For component testing, Enzyme was the big name and almost the only name at the time. It also supported really cool stuff like shallow rendering, which makes certain types of tests a lot easier. What I didn't expect though was how much Jest would evolve. It's so much faster now, and its developer experience, its support is outstanding. The community also has accepted much more that it's okay to run unit tests only in Node because they are unit tests. And if you need this full environment testing, you can delegate that to other type of integration in end-to-end tests using things like Selenium or Cypress. On the other side, Enzyme has kind of started lagging. Its support for newer version of React and new features like hooks has been kind of slow to come by. And if you're using it, you might have been struggling to write certain type of tests. And it's kind of been overtaken by React testing library. So the verdict, well, I feel in 2016, Mocha and Enzyme was the best of bread and it was the best tools available to you. But today, if you were to start a new project, I'd probably use Jest and React testing library, or even migrate to that if you're using those other tools. Now, I'm purposely omitting talking about things like Cypress or Selenium because they're in a different category of testing tool, and maybe that's better for a future video. Build tools. Build tools like Webpack or Parcel are really at the core of the ecosystem, and they impact developers and your developer experience, your user experience in a really direct way. Because of that, there's a lot more choices and a lot more nuance. Your experience is going to vary dramatically depending on if you're building a small side project or if you're trying to create the next Amazon. Because of that, it's almost impossible for your experience to mirror mine, but it's still a really important topic to touch on. In 2016, the big contenders were Webpack, but other tools like Browserify, with Browserify being more of the it just work, like easy to get started, and Webpack was the scary, behemoth, complicated, but that can do everything. There were also whatever came with your backend language of choice, like Rails had Sprocket. And you also had task runners like Gulp and Grunt that allowed you to make a more custom pipeline, but I felt it was a lot harder to do something like end to end and very integrated. Rollup was new and it introduced a real world implementation of what we had been talking about with ES6 modules, allowing tree shaking to make much smaller module by getting rid of more code that you're not actually using. So better dead code elimination. Stuff like required JS was kind of on its way out, and others like JSPM never really got a strong foothold. At the time, it feels like I tried everything. I was one of those people who were scared of the complexity of Webpack, and I was trying all these other tools that promised to be simpler out of the box. And that's kind of what happened is it was really easy to get stuff just working in a simple contrived example, but because I had to deal with legacy environment or I had some hedge cases to deal with at the companies I worked for, I always hit a wall where things were super difficult to do with these simpler tools. And in the end, I had to concede. I really needed the power of Webpack and its customizability. Anything Webpack couldn't do, I could write a plugin for, including things you'd never think about, like a fully custom module system or processing my asset in a completely different way. And I knew I could do it and it would work. Now, today, you might not have to deal with these weirder legacy environments anymore, or at least not as much. Webpack has been king for a while, but we're finally seeing significant innovation in the field. There's some competition between Webpack and Parcel. Originally, Parcel was pit as the simpler, zero config, faster alternative that's much more user friendly. And Webpack was still the more complicated do it all behemoth. But over time, they kind of stole ideas from each other, and now you can use Webpack almost zero config. It's pretty easy, it's pretty fast, and pretty much or very close is very close to hitting feature parity. So which one you use is more based on what you already know. No need to change what currently works. And Rollup really positioned itself as the tool to use if you want to build libraries in the most efficient way possible. I don't feel it can replace the whole tool chain though, it's more a complement to the others. There's also newcomers. Most interestingly to me is ESBuild. I think it's built in Go, but all around it promised to be so much faster than the Webpack and Parcel of the world, especially when it comes to minifying code, which in my experience is always by far, sometimes by an order of magnitude, the slowest part of your build. However, last time I looked at it, it was still missing some capabilities around code splitting, and that's a showstopper for me and the type of application I build. With that said, it is on their roadmap, and when they do fill that gap, I expect to fall in love with it. There's a wave of tools also like Snowpack that try to leverage more of the native support browsers have for ES6 modules and do more at that level. But I haven't seen a compelling story to use those and get anything that these other ahead of time build tools provide you, even when it comes to performance or build time. Oh, and one more. There's a tool called Rome that's being built by Sebastian McKenzie of Babel fame and Jamie Kyle that promise to replace everything. They have it do build, the linting, the type system, all of it, with the idea that if it's all integrated, they might be able to provide a lot more performance and an even better developer experience and ease of use. So let's keep an eye on that. It's still in pretty early stage. So the verdict, well, phew, there's a lot of stuff. With that said, right now, I still think it's going to come down to either Webpack or Parcel. And both are perfectly fine. They'll do everything you need, and they're both actually pretty easy to use. So if you know one, no need to jump over. You're not going to gain a whole lot. But whichever one you picked, you can just stick with it. If in 2016 you went with Webpack, you can still use Webpack. You can start a new project with Webpack today, and I'm sure you're going to be fine for the next 5 years. I do recommend, though, that you look at Rollup if you're doing libraries or you need that extra oomph in terms of optimization. And let's keep an eye on ESBuild. I really think there's a lot of potential there. And if you are already using it in production and it works for you, please comment below. I do want to hear of your experience. And there we go. That concludes the third part of our retrospective. It looks like while the classics are still going strong and they are still well maintained, there's a couple of new contenders in all the categories we went over today. We now have a couple more options to keep our eye on. Personally, I'm excited to see where ESBuild and Rome are going. And again, let me know, what are you using in production? Are you a Parcel fan? How's that working out for you? Are you an ESBuild early adopter? Again, please let me know. In the next part, we're going to be looking at dependency management and JavaScript module systems. We're also going to go over linting and code formatting. And finally, we're going to go over the different flavors of JavaScript and type systems. And with that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.